My name is Sean Kilpatrick, and I'm an intellectual property analyst here at the Eclipse Foundation. In this video, I'm going to present an introduction to the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property due diligence process. The Eclipse Foundation implements an intellectual property management policy based on a framework of established processes to ensure risk is mitigated in the open source software Eclipse projects deliver. The Eclipse Foundation has a well-defined intellectual property policy, corresponding IP due diligence process, and a dedicated team of professional IP specialists who perform the heavy lifting in the due diligence process. Eclipse Committers, the software designers who ultimately decide what will become project code and how an Eclipse open source project will leverage third-party content, are responsible for bringing IP issues to the attention of the Eclipse IP team. The Eclipse intellectual property policy is concerned with establishing practices to mitigate legal risks associated with building products based on Eclipse software. This includes ensuring that the licenses on project code and third-party content are valid and compatible, ensuring that copyright and ownership of both project code and third-party content is well understood, and that the provenance of the content being distributed both directly and indirectly by Eclipse projects is properly tracked. Let's take a look at the various parties that are involved in the Eclipse IP management process. The project team is the first party. Project content is authored and curated by committers using Git repositories that are managed and administered by the Eclipse Foundation. Adopters, or those individuals and organizations that consume Eclipse project content, either as end products or in source form, are the second party. External providers of content that is leveraged by the project team are the third party. Maven Central, npm.js, the Yarn and Golang repositories, and non-Eclipse Foundation projects hosted on GitHub are examples of third-party content. Content provided by external sources is considered third-party content regardless of how it is obtained by the project. Our due diligence process is concerned with the first and third parties, that is, project and third-party content. Our process treats these different kinds of content in different ways. Generally speaking, third-party content is consumed directly from software repositories. If necessary and sensible, the binary or distribution form of third-party content can be stored in a project's Git repository. When a project stores the source code for third-party content in one of their Git repositories, they are effectively forking the content, and it must be treated as though it were project code. Project code submissions are broken down into three separate categories. The initial contribution. The IP team will work with the project to resolve any provenance issues prior to the start of the IP review. Committers should ensure that necessary file headers are in place. Committers must deliver a snapshot of the initial project code to the IP team for review. Significant contributions, defined as those containing more than 1,000 lines of code, received from the community as merge or pull requests, must also go through a full IP due diligence review. Ongoing contributions from project committers, that is, the day-to-day work done by project committers, do not require further scrutiny. Committers can push their own day-to-day work directly into the project repository. All contributions provided to the project by people who are not committers, generally in the form of a merge or pull request, need to be vetted. Committers are the first line of defense in this. All Eclipse Foundation Git repositories have a hook installed that checks commits included in merge and pull requests to ensure that the author is covered by a contribution agreement. Contributors who are not committers must have signed the Eclipse Contributor Agreement, or ECA. Committers are automatically covered by virtue of their committer agreement. We'll leave discussion of the various agreements for another session. Please note that anonymous contributions are not supported. If you have any reason to doubt the origin or provenance of a particular contribution, contact the IP team for assistance. The license compatibility and compliance focus for third-party dependency libraries is different than the process for project code. The Eclipse IP team reviews all third-party content on a license certification basis only, without an in-depth analysis of the content. When we say all third-party content, we mean all. It's recursive, applying to dependencies of dependencies all the way down the platform. The definition of platform varies from project to project, depending on the sorts of things the project is building. For most projects, the platform is either the operating system or the virtual machine upon which the project's products run. We employ a trust but verify approach. Eclipse project committers, as our first line of defense in the Eclipse IP due diligence process, must identify the licenses of the content that they adopt as they are adopting it and ensure that the licenses of the content that they use are compatible with the project license. As an Eclipse project gets closer to being ready to engage in a release, the project committers must confirm that the content that they intend to include in the release is license compatible. Again, committers are the first line of defense in the implementation of the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property due diligence process. Committers are covered by legal agreements that ensure that, among other things, they have the necessary rights to contribute the content that they create to Eclipse project repositories. Committers are also the gatekeepers. They are responsible for ensuring that contributions of code made by others can be merged. Specifically, they need to ensure that the necessary rights have been conveyed by checking that contributors have signed the Eclipse Contributor Agreement. Committers are also our first line of defense when it comes to a project's adoption of third-party content. Committers must verify that the licenses of the third-party content they leverage is consistently covered by a license that is compatible with the project license. When the committer is not sure, they must connect with the Eclipse IP team for assistance. So exactly what types of content must be vetted by the Eclipse IP team? We must review all content that is contained in a project version control system, or which can be downloaded from the project. Initial contributions must undergo a full due diligence review. Third-party libraries must also be vetted on a license and copyright basis. Many other contributions must also be vetted, such as contributions greater than 1,000 lines of code. The primary communication channel between Eclipse committers and the Eclipse IP team is the Contribution Questionnaire, or CQ. CQs are used to engage the IP team when their assistance is required to review intellectual property. A CQ is created when a committer completes a questionnaire regarding a project content contribution or third-party content. The CQ serves as a record in IPzilla that tracks the progress of the IP review and approval process. All CQ records are archived to maintain an ever-growing database of intellectual property information and to track issues. Although Eclipse is not permitted to distribute content that is licensed under non-approved licenses, there are still ways in which a project may leverage content under a license that is not approved for distribution. A works with submission is one such way. For example, content that is utilized by the project for build and test purposes only and will not actually be distributed by the project is considered a works with dependency and is not subject to a license review. If you have questions about any content that falls outside of the standard review framework, please connect with the IP team for assistance. There are two ways to contact the Eclipse IP team when preparing to submit a contribution. You can create a contribution questionnaire, or CQ, when you're not sure whether or not a license is compatible, or when you receive a contribution of more than 1,000 lines of code. Or by email when you're just not sure about something related to intellectual property at emo-ip-team@eclipse.org. Thank you for watching, and we at the Eclipse IP team look forward to working with you.